Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to carry on looking at the basics of VBA. In the previous section we created this little sub that just proves that you can use a personal computer to multiply two numbers together and that you can in fact display the answer on the screen. I explained towards the end of the last section about the importance of option explicit, and we've seen variables A and B here, and we've seen constants, the numbers 6 and 4. Now what we're going to do first in this section is to talk about the scope of variables. Now what I've done here is to create a second sub. I've called it Demo2. And I've just got a single statement in it, message box A. So display message box with the value of A in it. I'm not going to run that, let's just try to compile it. Now I get a compile error and it says this variable is not defined. The variable definition we have here in the sub demo1 is local to that sub. So we've defined the variable A as an integer, but the scope of that definition is only the sub in which it's defined. As far as sub demo2 is concerned, it's got no idea what A is. However, it is possible to extend the scope of a variable, and we can, for example, make a variable have a scope of all the procedures within this module. So if I declare up here private A as integer, then I'm going to remove that definition and just leave that one as dimB as integer. Let's try compiling that. That compiles okay. Now anything that's declared in a module as private can be used anywhere within that module. If I actually defined a variable as public, so for instance if I said public B as integer and remove that definition, then what I have with public B is a variable that is defined and usable in any module in my project. Any of the other modules could refer to B and they would use the B that's here, public B, as integer. So public means any module, private means any procedure in the current module, and a local definition within a sub only works within the sub where it's defined. Now one of the consequences of developing Access applications, including the use of VBA, particularly as those applications get more complex and as the number of variables becomes larger and you've got variables that are declared as private and public and so on, is it's very easy to lose track of what a particular variable means, and it's a good idea to use good descriptive names, and that's something we're going to be doing from now on. But in addition to using good descriptive names, it's also a very good principle to use a naming convention. And there are a number of well-known naming conventions, including one called Hungarian notation. When we're using VBA, we tend to follow a basic version of that Hungarian notation, and specifically with Access, in addition, we have some naming standards for the objects within a database. For instance, the standard for the names of forms is to begin them with the letters FRM, as in here, FRM about, FRM getting started. Now integer variables we normally prefix with the three letters int. And there I've just changed our module to use the prefix of int to indicate that they are all integer variables. I'm not going to worry too much about the names A and B at the moment, but I'll use more meaningful names from now on. And for each of the different types of variable that we come across, there is an equivalent prefix. Now when it comes to naming standards and naming conventions, we could spend many long and happy hours discussing them and going through all the possibilities, but I don't propose to do that. I'm going to be using a few examples during the rest of the course. There are some good links. There's a good link on Wikipedia to Hungarian notation in general, and Microsoft Support has some good links as well, including this one. And this particular one lists different types of objects and the prefix. Many of these are very relevant to Access, so things like form, FRM prefix, checkbox, CHK prefix, combo box, and so on. So I suggest it's a pretty good idea to get used to using those, and you will find that they will help you greatly, particularly if you've developed a large system and then maybe you don't work on it for a while and you come back to it. Having those names can really help to remind you of what the items and objects in the system are and what each of them does. Having talked about scope, let me now run demo 2. What do you think that message box will say? Yeah, you may have guessed it says 0. Why does it say 0? Well, it says 0 because in demo 2 we haven't given int a value. So the assignment of the value 6 to int a in demo 1 only occurs in demo 1. And once demo 1 has run, that value will be lost, it'll be gone. And in the case of demo 2, we hadn't assigned any value to int a at all. So that's another very important point. Okay, let's look at demo 2 again. I'm going to assign a value to int a. In demo 2, I'm going to call it this time 12. And in the message box, I've typed a literal string. I've put double quotes. The number of months in a year is double quotes. Something within double quotes like that is a string, and if I just had message box with that in it, ignore the int a at the end, then the message box would say the number of months in a year is, and that's it. If I want it to say the number of months in a year is 12, then I need to concatenate the items that are being shown in the message box. And the concatenation character is the ampersand symbol. So this will say the number of months in a year is, note the space after is, and then it will be concatenated, joined together with int a, which just happens to be 12. Let's try running that now. And there we are, the number of months in a year is 12. Now what we have here is a string, and this is a string constant, the number of months in a year is. We can also have string variables. So for instance, I could say, now note how I've changed demo 2. I've now declared the variable str_prefix to be a string variable. I've assigned a value to it, so I've given it the value the number of months in a year is, followed by a space. And then in the message box, I've said in the message box display str_prefix and int a. Let's try running that now. And once again, that's absolutely fine. Now so far we've seen two types of variable in VBA. We've seen the integer type and the string type, and there are dozens of others. If you want the definitive list of the types, you can use a feature that we've already seen, which is called IntelliSense. It actually occurs in a number of places in VBA and is very useful. If I declare a new dummy variable, I'm going to say dim_c as, when I press space, I get a list of all of the available types. Now many of these you'll use quite rarely, if at all. Some of them you'll use very often. Integer and string are two that you'll see very often. Other useful values are values like Boolean, which is basically a true-false type value. You also have byte for the smallest way of storing a number. And then there are various others. Some of these will come across during the course later on, and some of them you may never use. But that's a very important list, and you always need to choose a variable type from that list because there are no others in Access. Now let me show you another manifestation of IntelliSense that you might well find useful. Let's suppose that you're going to type a command. You can't remember what the command is. Say you know it begins with a D. If you press Control and Space, what Access VBA does is to give you a list of the available commands that begin with D. And then you say, I think it's an O. So then you type an O, and eventually, do command, that's the one that I want. So double click, that command is now in there. Now the do command, as we'll see a little bit later on, is followed by something else. So if I now press a dot, I now get a list of all the things that could follow that. So I could do things like close after that. So as I say, more of that later, but that's another manifestation of IntelliSense. And one more of those which is really useful is this one. We saw earlier on that when we typed in message box, VBA gave us some help as to what the arguments or parameters of message box are. And at the moment in demo 2, the message box puts out the prefix concatenated with int a. If I were after int a to put a comma, then Access would once again bring up the IntelliSense prompts for the arguments of the message box command. Now with this command, the next argument to enter is bold, so we've already got our prompt. That's in italic to the left of the bold part. We've already put that in. The next thing we choose is the style of message box. And basically the message box style determines not only whether it's critical or informational or warning, but also which buttons we get. So if I choose, say, VB OK only, I will only get an OK button. So let me double click that. Now I put a comma. I've done that argument, that parameter. The next one is title. Note the bold prompt again. Let's just put new title at the top there. And then I've got other parameters. I can give the name of a help file, and then I can also put a message box result option in there. But I think those three will do for now. So I've said, say the number of months in a year is 12, then I've said a message box with OK only, and it's going to have new title as the title. So let's try running demo 2 now. And there we are. It's just got an OK button, it's got new title as the title, the number of the months in a year is 12. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate something else now that might avoid you an awful lot of annoyance. Let's suppose that I'm going to make str prefix private to this module, so I'm going to drop the definition up there. That's fine, and therefore I can use str prefix in here in demo 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in here str prefix equals, and I'm going to use the text which is in use in demo 2. So I'm just going to copy the same text from there. Watch what happens when I click down here to do a copy. I get a compile error. And the reason I get a compile error is that the way that I've got my options set, VBA is checking the syntax of what I've typed as soon as I leave the line that I've been working on. So as soon as I left that line, it said, let's have a look at that line, and it said, oh, I don't like that. You've left an equal sign there with nothing after it. Now, some people like working that way, doesn't bother them at all, and in fact I could just carry on, and although it would not run the program, it would give me a compile error if I tried to run it. I could do some more editing. Now you can change the behavior of VBA so that it doesn't do that checking, and that's what I mentioned quite a bit earlier on in Tools Options. One of the options there is Auto Syntax Check. Now if I check that off and click on OK, let me go back and just try doing that same thing again, equals. Now watch what happens when I go down here to do a copy and paste. It will now let me go down and do that copy. I can go back up here and do the paste, and in fact I can make as many syntax errors as I like. Now of course, even if I've got that switched off, if I came to try to run demo 1, it would give me a compile error. But it does mean that I can edit freely, and a lot of people prefer to work in that way. But it's a very personal choice, it's up to you. And then I've got one other thing to demonstrate in this section, and that is if I go back to demo 2, note we've got the variable str prefix with that string value, and then we've got the message box. Let me put the literal string value in here instead of str prefix. What happens sometimes is that the length of a command line means that it goes out of view off of the edge of the code window. Now you've got a scroll bar here, you can actually scroll along and look at it, but that can be a bit of a nuisance. You can set up a line to continue on to the next line, and all you need to do is to put an underscore at the end. So if I put after int a comma space and before the VB and VB OK only, I put an underscore and then press a return. I normally indent with a further tab character. That's actually a long line. It's actually a command that occupies 2 lines in the code window, but the underscore character at the end means that VBA considers it to be a single command line. So that's how to use a continuation character to deal with long command lines. So that's it for this section. We've got one more section on the basic theory of VBA before we start using it in Access, so please join me for that.